What's up, everybody? Welcome back to FFT. I'm Trevor, and today we're talking about keeper leagues. Is a keeper league right for you? Let's check it out. All right, so this is the second of a four-part mini-series where we are checking out the different types of fantasy football leagues. We're looking at redraft leagues, keeper leagues, dynasty leagues, and best ball leagues. If you want to know if a redraft league is right for you, I recommend checking out one of the earlier videos. I'll post that link in the description. Okay, so what is a keeper league? I'm going to break it down for you guys. I'm going to give you the pros, I'm going to give you the cons, and I'm going to give you my final overall rankings or my personal kind of tier list for you guys. So what is it? Well, keeper leagues are actually very similar to redraft leagues with really one big difference. Depending on the keeper league that you're in, you can keep one or more players based on the roster that you drafted from the previous year. So the creation of the league starts just like a normal redraft league where you fill your roster based on the amount of roster spots available. But every year going forward, you have the opportunity to select a certain amount of players based off of the amount that the commissioner set to remain on your team going into the next season. So let's say if the number of keepers is 3, for example, you can keep anywhere from 0 to 3 players that you drafted from the previous year. So what are the two most common ways of managing these keepers? Well, the first is by placing those keepers in the first rounds of the draft. So if you say decide to keep 3 players, it would take up the first 3 rounds of the draft for you. So those are 3 potentially valuable picks for you. So you got to decide if that's something you want to do. The other way to manage it is by placing the keepers in the spots where they were originally drafted the previous year. So if you drafted somebody in the 3rd round and the 12th round, and those 2 people are the players you want to keep, you could keep them in the 3rd round and the 12th round respectively. And that would actually be the way that I would recommend doing it if you decide to join a keeper league or if you're the one starting the keeper league. If you're the commissioner, that would probably be the way to go. So you're not forcing people to make the decision. If they took them in the 12th round originally and it's kind of a 12th round player, you're forcing them to take up a 2nd round slot for that or a 1st round slot. I wouldn't recommend going that way. As I mentioned in an earlier video, one of the leagues that I'm in is a 1 keeper league. So we're actually able to keep up to 1 player from the previous year going into the next season. We don't have to keep anybody, but we have the option to keep somebody if they ended up being a huge asset to our team. The other twist in that league, though, is that every year, if you decide to keep them, the spot that you keep them in moves up 1 round. So let's say I originally drafted somebody in the 2nd round, they would move up to the 1st round and take that 1st round spot in the year after that. And if I kept them again, well, I wouldn't be able to keep them again because then they would disappear into the nether. So this really forces me to consider if the player I decide to keep is worth a 1st round spot or not if I originally drafted them in the 2nd round. All right, let's take a look at the pros for joining a keeper league or starting a keeper league. This type of league takes a little bit more kind of skill and knowledge than a redraft league in some cases, but it's definitely still more beginner friendly than like a dynasty league, for example. I'm actually putting together a keeper league right now, and almost half of the players that are joining that league are somewhat new to fantasy football. But because this type of league rewards seasoned players while also being a bit more forgiving and allowing growth for new players, it's actually a great middle ground for kind of everywhere in between, whether you're new to fantasy football or not. Another reason to potentially join a keeper league is because it allows for some fun strategy when drafting each year. So in my keeper league, where we can keep up to 1 player because we have that keeper option, teams will actually start the draft normally for the first few rounds, but often shoot for players with higher ceilings or even higher potential in later rounds because they're drafting with the hope that it pays off for their keeper option the following year. So what I actually decided to do last year is I kind of drafted normally from rounds 1 through about 10. And for the rest of the draft, I actually started drafting rookies, players with high upside, high ceiling players, or players with a lot of potential. Not necessarily players that are consistent or have the highest floor, but players that might show up and maybe be a spark or an asset for their team from year to year going forward. And so I actually ended up drafting Garrett Wilson in the 12th round. And because of the way that my league is set up, I can now keep him in the 11th round this coming year, this coming season. So you can actually take a look right now at all of the keeper options that I have. Is Garrett Wilson the best pick? I think so. Based on where I drafted him, I get to keep him in the 11th round when his ADP is far above that. So that's just kind of a fun thing to be able to play around with and have an option going into the next season. The last reason you should really consider a keeper league is because, and only some leagues allow this, but in our redraft league, we actually allow the trading of keepers for other keeper options or even other draft positions. So having the opportunity to do this and the ability to do this actually can make the draft each year a little bit more dynamic and even a little bit more chaotic, which can honestly be a lot of fun. It really keeps you on your toes, keeps all the players and members on their toes, and forces people to pivot on their original strategy, whether they were going to maybe focus RBs early or wide receivers early. Well, if a lot of keepers end up being wide receivers, they may not have as many options going into the draft, so it may force them to kind of pivot on their original strategy going into the draft. They may have to choose a kind of an alternate route at that point. Okay, let's talk about some cons. I really only have two reasons why you should maybe reconsider joining a keeper league. The first is, just like with redraft leagues, generally the majority of your team from year to year is going to be extremely different. The reason that's a bad thing or can be a bad thing is for those of you that had a great team or a great draft the previous year, you really only get a benefit from part of that going into the next season, which can really be a bummer for people that spend a lot of time and energy putting together a perfect team. The second reason why you should maybe reconsider joining a keeper league or join a different league is that depending on the amount of players that are allowed to be kept from year to year, this format can actually really hurt teams that don't have a good initial draft to start. Say, for example, it's a 5-keeper league with 12 teams. So there's a lot of players that are being drafted each year. If you end up taking a bunch of RBs or running backs that end up getting hurt or don't show up and end up kind of being duds for your team and for the season, it's going to potentially be extremely difficult for you to fix that even going into the following season. The reason for that is you better believe that the other 11 teams that have really good running backs or have selected great running backs, they're going to end up keeping probably two or three out of the 5 that they get to keep in running backs from year to year, which really means that there's going to be slim pickings for the rest of the teams that don't have a great running back room. So even though, yes, it is a little bit more forgiving than a redraft league, you're still going to have some issues when it comes to finding good positional slots if you don't have a good initial draft, especially with the larger team leagues. So let's jump into kind of my personal tier list. Let's start with new players. So new players, I give this a B-. The reason for that is that as a new player, I think that there's actually better options for you when it comes to trying out fantasy football. But if you actually end up enjoying fantasy football a ton and want to take it more seriously in the future, this could potentially be a perfect sort of league for you. It definitely has room for you to grow and expand your knowledge when it comes to fantasy football. So what about seasoned players? Well, seasoned players, I actually give it a B+. As a seasoned player, this is actually one of my favorite types of leagues to play in. You get the thrill of drafting and developing a kind of mostly new roster each year, which I really enjoy the drafting when it comes to fantasy football. That's one of my favorite things to do. But you also get a benefit and reap the rewards from good picks from the previous year as well. So you kind of get the best of both worlds when it comes to fantasy football. You get a draft mostly new teams each year, but you also get a benefit from either risky picks or good picks from the previous year as well. So overall, I give keeper leagues a B+. It has the appeal and the forgiveness of a redraft league, but also really allows you to benefit from potentially risky picks. All right, well, that's it. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with my rankings Also, please like this video and subscribe if you want some more FFT content. But until then, I'll catch you next time. See you guys.